Call the meeting to order, and will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Hagenow.
Present.
Councilmember Kerr.
Present.
Councilmember Martin.
Present.
Councilmember Parman.
Hello.
Councilmember Sullivan.
Here.
Councilmember Thisted. And Mayor Riley.
Present.
There are 6 members present.
Thank you. And I would like to point out that Councilmember Thisted is currently on vacation with an approved absence. Before we start, I'd like to point out that we are the Dillon Keystone Police Department Chief is here today, and particularly when we talk about the IGA. So again, welcome, Chief.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
You are always welcome here. Unless I get sick. I probably shouldn't joke, should I? All right. The next item of business is public comment. And public comment is open to anyone who'd like to make a comment on any item on the work session agenda that we're going through this morning. At the council meeting this evening, we'll have another public comment period that will be open to any topic. Would anyone like to speak to council?
We do have 1 person online.
All right. In that case, we'd like to ask you to please limit your comments to no more than 3 minutes, but please, Maddie, if you could bring them on so they can speak.
You should have the access now, but Julie, you'll need to unmute your microphone.
Can you give her the opportunity to share her video as well?
Yes, she should be able to unmute and share her video.
If the council wouldn't object, if Julie and Maddie can figure out how she could speak, we can allow her to come in and speak later as we have an opportunity going through the package. Is that okay with the rest of the council? Yes. All right. Is that okay with you, Madam Clerk?
Yes.
All right. The next item is discussion of town financials, and I'll turn it over to our town manager.
And I will let our finance director, Keystone, Fox, take this.
All right, everybody. Heidi Fox, finance director. So we are going to talk about February tax revenues and March financials. So we'll start with the pretty graphs first, and then we'll dive into some more numbers. But you will see the sales tax revenue for the by month. In the blue there, you'll see that's for 2025. In the green, you'll see 2024. What is missing, but hopefully you guys will be able to follow along, is the axis on the bottom that has the months. So the first one you'll see is January, the blue line, and the second one is February, which is the blue and green, and then March, April, so on for the green. But so far we have 1 month, which is February, that we have for 2024, 2025. And you will see that sales tax revenue is increased by 10% compared to the February 2024. So that's very positive to see. And then our year-to-date collection now accounts for 25 or 28% of the 25 budget, with the budget projections at 32%. Keep in mind that the projections for January were a little overstated for January. And hopefully March, we've seen March lodging tax come in, and it was due yesterday, and those numbers are looking very strong. So the month of March sales tax should be strong as well, and hopefully make up for that January. So any questions on that?
I did have a general question. Is there any way, as I'm looking at these graphs, obviously there's a massive die-off of revenue during our slower seasons. And I was just thinking, if we were to benchmark against other mountain towns that might have more activities during these seasons, and just using Breckenridge as an example, they maintain their mountain through May. Would we be able to look at their numbers and I know we're talking apples and oranges, right? But at least correlation-wise, and maybe see missed opportunity for revenue from a sales perspective, because I think that would help drive potential conversations on our business community in the future if we did want to support that. So I know it's not like something by next council meeting, but just in the future, maybe if we could benchmark against other towns, that would be something I'd be interested to see.
Yes, so I can definitely work on that. A lot of municipalities, do the same reporting online, which is accessible to the public, and then also CAST compiles that information as long as the municipalities send it to them, so I can reach out to them and kind of get something in front of you of what that looks like. I can't guarantee that I'll have each municipality, but it might give you some idea.
Oh yeah, I mean, by no means am I expecting every single one, just more of a trend, right? Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
Councilmember Kirk.
I'm not sure I understand what you're telling us about the February comparison. So we are comparing all the sales tax in February 2025 to 20 days of sales tax in 2024, or no?
No, we actually, for comparison purposes, we took the full month of February sales tax that we would have received if we were a town for the full month of February.
Okay, so we didn't actually get that, but for purposes of comparison, you acted as if we had.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Perfect, thanks.
Great question.
Other questions?
Okay, awesome. All right, and then we'll move on to the sales tax by industry by month. So nice, pretty colorful graph right there. You will see at the very bottom there the industries that we are tracking by color, and then the revenue that they do bring in. What you will notice that what we just talked about, February 2025 recorded the highest monthly revenue so far. And just keep in mind that it's, we don't have a whole lot of data besides last year to compare it to. Lodging is our driving point for the industry, as we know, especially during the winter months. Restaurants and retail remain steady and a good secondary component of the sales tax. As discussed in last month, the spike in all others for the November was because of construction-related activity. As you guys are well aware, January, February, March, and December are our strongest months for that seasonal trend. And then April, the month that we're in now, through June are going to be our slowest months for sales tax and lodging tax collection. So you'll see those decline a great deal at the next meeting. So any questions on those? All right. Yeah, the third page there was just my summary of it, and then the page number 4 is our lodging tax revenue, which we just started in January, so you just have those 2 months for comparisons, January and February. And we will see that February was definitely exceeded January, so that's a positive thing to say, and March will exceed the February's. So another positive, positive in that. So we've collected almost a little over 563,000, which represents 35% of the annual lodging tax budget of 1.6 million. February collections were up 15% from January. And then, of course, just for everybody's reference, the funds for our lodging tax are restricted for our capital infrastructure for Highway 6 safety and public safety.
Councilmember Hagan.
The 35% that you're talking about of the 1.6 million that we budgeted, are we on track to get that full 1.6 by the end of the year?
We are. Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Martin.
Are we by chance keeping any side notes about snowfall when the snowfall or ski resort is opening, as to maybe having some potential impact from, as we keep this history, to notice, that if we see a decrease or a decline, that, well, the resort or our snowfall conditions, everything opened up a month later, or any other historical notes that, might clue us in if we see a huge increase or decrease.
We're not keeping anything like that for several reasons. First of all that information is readily accessible if we do need to give it. And then the point comes, what else other than snowfall weather dramatically impact tourism? It could get just either too incorrect or too complicated. I think our best comparison is to ourselves, and when we see that big deviation, we can go back and check.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Other questions?
All right, and then the last graph is our monthly Summit County Housing Authority contributions. You will see that we don't have any comparisons month to year, but we do have a full year of those contributions. We did not get February contributions from last year from the Summit County Housing Authority. According to one of the IGAs that didn't start until March, so that's why you see it only starting in March for 2024. Another notable aspect in that is we had a one-time $90,000 contribution that came out of our net, and I actually deducted that from this. Deduction that way for comparisons, we can see how they all contribute each month going forward. The fees, though, that they charge before they remit our contribution are taken out and in this graph. Any questions there? All right, so next we'll talk about the financials for March. You'll see on that first page, it's our balance sheet, which is always nice to look at. It'll have our total cash that we have in the bank with our accounts receivable that you'll see up there for assets. The next line is our liabilities. You'll see our AP and any liabilities that we have that really don't amount to a whole lot at this time, which is nice. And then you'll see our fund equity. If you go over to page 2, this is where our P&L starts, and I will talk about it at a high level, and I'll point out anything of significance, but if you guys have any questions, just let me know.
One question on the balance sheet. I see a ComDev compliance deposit, so I assume that instead of getting a letter of credit, somebody actually gave us cash.
Yes, so good, great question. So yes, one of the developments did not give us a letter of credit, but instead gave us cash for their landscaping deposit. And so once the town is satisfied with that, that deposit will go back to them.
Town manager?
That deposit is being held in our co-trust account where it is earning interest.
Yeah, a little over 4% right now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Councilmember Sullivan?
I just wanted to be reminded, why is there no nicotine or specific ownership tax in Q1?
So that, the nicotine tax, we should be getting the full year of that once the IGA is signed by all the towns. Currently, it's just not signed by all the towns, and so Summit County is holding those funds until that is completed. And then the specific ownership tax, we will not be getting because we do not levy a property tax.
Back in the nicotine tax, what organization is this that we're signing the IGA to be in, and what's the status of that?
This is with the county and the other municipalities. They're all considering, well, they're all approving the IGA.
Is this some kind of entity that meets and approves?
No, these will be the individual. We have approved our amendment to drain. All the other entities are approving it. It will be effective January 1st of this year. So,
Of 2025.
2025.
They all think it's going to be retroactive?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, that was my question, because we talked about the housing fund, and they didn't send us the money until the IGA was signed.
No, the IGA, well, the problem with the IGA for the housing fund is it specifically said that the effective date was March 1st. The effective date on the nicotine IGA is January 1st of this year.
And to just be clear, so there's nothing like the housing authority for the nicotine decisions?
No,
It's just the municipalities themselves?
yes, it's
Okay,
a county tax, although the funds are dedicated to certain, they're limited as to what they can be used, and some of these, the Early Childhood Options Board was basically set up to administer some of these funds. They're not responsible for the distribution of the funds, unlike the Housing Board. The Housing Board is funded, like Early Childhood Options comes to the communities every year and asks for funding. The Housing Board's funding is written into the IGA. They give it off the top.
Since the county took the position on the SCHA February funding of last year, would it be fair to ask you at your next SCHA board meeting if the SCHA would claw back that $117,000, which was distributed to the county, and it should by the bylaws of by the IGA, those funds for any incorporated town should have been retained by SCHA.
I will certainly put in an official ask that they do so.
All right, and the other notable revenue is the highway users tax fund. We will not be getting that until July 1st, and that's when the state's fiscal year starts, and we qualify for those funds. So, and I am not entirely sure if we'll actually get the 66,000 from that, or if it'll be reduced. So they don't give. The state will not give you any estimates on what they're going to give you, so we won't know until that revenue starts to stream in. Other than that, if you look at the revenue, we are 35% of our budget. And so far, everything's pretty much on track except for those few things that we did discuss. And if you look at the 25 forecast, there we've tried to update some of those numbers to be more realistic of what we're getting and not getting based on our, I guess, first full year. And if you go down to our expenditures, and then the 35% of the budget is actually is a really good spot for where we need to be. 25% of the year has elapsed, so that looks really good. And then if you look at the expenditures for the general fund, we're at 23% of budget. And like I said, the 25% of the year has elapsed. With that being said, there are some notable items on the expenditures. The first one is on page 3, and you'll see that the accounting contract with M&W is over budget, so that will definitely be over budget for this year. Their contract with us is coming to an end as we get Cassell up and running. Then we'll have it fully in-house and we won't have to use their services anymore. So we're looking forward to that. That's really kind of it for the expenditures that are notable. There's definitely some items in the budget that aren't allocated to expenditures at this time, but will be. And then the other thing is, if you look at our public works, you'll notice that the road maintenance, you'll notice that in the EP too. We're paying for the snow plowing for this year, January, February, and March, and some of 2024, which will be allocated to 2024. So a lot of that is not actually going to show in this until the April financials. And so that'll give us a little more realistic look at what our road maintenance will look at. We're currently just still on the county's agreement with everyone with the HOAs, and then starting next year.
We never talk about that.
Because that's not what I was told. Okay. Okay, well, I was misinformed. Okay. All right.
Councilmember Hagan.
Thank you. Could you shed some light on, under the expenditures line 58, health insurance premiums, why there's a $13,000 delta? Was it just more expensive than we anticipated, or was there a broader issue with the marketplace?
I want to say that it's paid in advance, and so it looks a little out of whack, but I'm trying to find it on here.
I'm pretty sure I included our finance director. That's all I'm thinking of, is it might be possible I didn't include the finance director in the health insurance premiums when budgeted.
Gotcha.
I'm guessing.
Okay, thank you.
One last question.
Councilmember Sullivan.
My last question. Breaking up the police chief here, but the public safety was probably the most out of whack versus our proposed budget. Is that because of the transition county and
So there's a couple of things with that. So some of that public safety is going to come out of our lodging tax, and so far it's just coming out of our general fund. It will be over budget because currently we're paying for the Keystone public safety, and the Summit County contract ends in May. So we have a little double up there. Mhm.
Councilmember Hagan,
With that, I remember the meeting where we were talking about this, and I forget the exact amount, but are we still on track for that to be around 300,000 is the total, I don't want to say like double payment, but like double payments? for that
When,
contract?
yeah, when I looked at it, it's gonna be about $100,000 over budget.
Okay, thank you.
any other questions? All right.
Yeah, do you guys want to, we can go into some of our restricted funds, the workforce housing. So pretty straightforward there with the workforce housing, the CH Housing Authority funds. Those are pretty much, they're a little behind what we had projected. The interest that we earn on that money is definitely gonna be less than what we had anticipated. And then you'll see the down payment assistance, you'll see the loan that one of our employees took advantage of that is being, it'll be repaid. So that money will go back into that housing fund. But then if you look at our surplus, right now we're looking at just a little under 500,000, and we have an ending balance in the housing fund of about 1.2. If you go down to our CTF fund, you'll see that everything is zero there for the months ending, and that'll continue for the rest of the year as we won't receive any funds from the state until next budget year.
Why aren't we receiving funds from the state till next year?
That is because they have to, it has to do with like the roads, like they have to have our road information first, which, no, okay. Let me, hold on.
You're
Give me
thinking
a
UTF.
minute and let me look at the email. Give me just a second. So basically, they just said that since we recently incorporated in the population will start with the year 24, that means that the town can be enrolled in the CTF and beginning payments starting in 2006 as per their policy.
2000 and what?
2026. So it's based on our population.
But we had the population number a year ago.
They make distributions for the Conservation Trust Fund. I'm on their webpage here.
Yeah.
Based on the population on January 1st, 2 years prior. So the 2025 numbers were distributed on the population January 1st, 2023.
Are our population numbers now being populated onto their website?
I assume so. It's the state website. I hope we get 2026.
Yeah, it should be.
About that, so.
Yeah, well, they did confirm we'll get 2026, and then I have to file a report later on this year with and then we go down to the lodging tax fund, you'll see that just a little over 563,000 is what we've collected for January and February so far. You'll see our interest income there. We don't have any expenditures, but like we talked about a little bit earlier, the police services, public safety, we have budgeted to come out of that. We've just hit the general fund for that first, but then we'll start seeing that out of the lodging tax as we move forward into the year.
So we're not handling the lodging tax like we handle the sales tax with an accrual.
You know, it's on a cash basis, and honestly, the sales tax should also be on the cash basis, because right now it's just an estimate, because we don't know what we're going to receive. So it's just not the best method to do the accrual rate up front, because it'll just distort those numbers if we don't meet what our estimates are, if that makes sense. So once we get the financials in-house, that'll change. And then at the end of the year, when we do our audit, it'll go to a modified accrual.
So at the end of the year, the November and December dollars will be reflected in the final
Yes,
financials as you're going forward.
yes.
Then I assume that under that system, then we would see the 3 months ended would reflect only the January and February numbers
Right.
for the budget this year.
Exactly, yeah. So when it comes to like the 24 revenues and expenditures, they'll all hit the 24 budget and audit. And that's part of the reconciliation that M&W has to do before the auditors get a hold of our financial numbers. So hopefully they've already been doing that.
And then it sounds like there'll probably be one more skewed year in our books. Because 2025 won't show the November or December 24 revenue. Correct? Because their revenue will be posted towards 2024, but in future years,
It's 2024.
it'll occur when we receive it, right? So we.
Well, it gets backdated, so,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So, okay, then there is no,
Yeah.
I'm just confused.
Yeah, the modified accrual.
Yeah. The problem with the accrual for the sales tax is they're just estimating what they think we're gonna receive, and it's not based on, since we don't actually, the accrual works really well when you know what you've been billed. But it still gets posted to the year that it is allocated towards.
In next year's budget, then the budgeted amount would be based only on the months that would be included, that you would actually be receiving the cash for, and then at the end of the year, you'd have to make up for the modified accrual.
Right.
All right. Any questions? All right,
Kind of a question and a comment.
Councilmember Kerr?
I can see the touch on this accounting spreadsheet. I can see the differences that are happening. It's a little more clarity. And I think it's a great benefit that we now have a professional finance director. It's really to our credit, because most of our questions are sort of tangential, but you get the whole picture. I know that we're going to have our first audit in May. I'm wondering in the June-July period whether it would be reasonable to ask you to do us a recap of some of these changes to the budget, that a few sources of sales tax that are not coming in on the timeline we anticipated, a few things like the 911 and something somebody else mentioned, the MC that's coming in as a higher expense. These are each individual or not a big deal, but I would wonder if you could give us a recap of your assessment of where we should be watching more closely, or may have to make some other decisions to offset that. Is that a reasonable request? Would anybody like to hear that?
Oh, absolutely. It's a total reasonable request, and I've been working with M&W and just trying to update those cash flow projections so they're more realistic. Even though it's happening, there's still when you outsource something, there's still a little bit of a disconnect. So once I can bring everything in-house, they'll be more aligned. Part of the problem with the outsourcing is when we get these financials, when I look at them and if I see issues or if I have questions, they don't get answered until the following month. So there's a delay. There's definitely a delay in that, but that'll go away soon.
Okay, I appreciate that. And again, I think it just tells us once again why it is important that we have you on board now. The reason I'm asking this is what Councilmember Hagenau alluded to, the fact that all of our neighboring towns are taking another look at their budget and are rethinking some of the things that they had decided on. And I don't know that we need to do that. Maybe we were incredibly conservative last December, but I think you could give us an assessment that would help us understand our midway status and set us up for the November-December budget talks.
Yeah, absolutely, and great point there. I like to think that we can be cautiously optimistic with our current 25 budget. And with that being said, the reason I say that is our big months for our tax revenue are, this December, January, February, March. We've already gone through January, February, and March, and they've been strong. The up and coming months, especially the April through June, are our slow months. So if tourism declines and consumer confidence declines even more, I don't know if we're really going to see a hit to that because there's not any activity anyhow. And so when I say cautiously optimistic with that, my hope is that consumer confidence, when we get to the end of the year for that December, when those revenues are strong again, that we'll be back where we need to be. But we'll be able to see through other, sales tax revenues, other municipalities, how that's performing and where we are. And the expenditures that we have budgeted are very small. We don't have like the big multi-million-dollar projects the other municipalities were counting on doing this year with the grant funds. So if we have to pivot or if we have to move, it's not going to be as great as everyone else. The 26 budget, when we start building that and when it comes for approval, that's going to be the big, what are we going to do based on what's going on?
That's what I'm talking about, what you just did. Thank you.
And one of the things that happened with the other towns is a little bit different from the way our town manager handled particularly the revenue projections, is that the town manager, except for one case, used last year's actuals as his revenue projections, or in the case of the end of the year before's actuals that the county had projected for us. The other towns, and I can speak to Dillon, and I would assume the other towns were similar, assumed a 3% increase. So we started the year assuming a flat revenue to be conservative, and at least Dillon had the 3% increase in revenue, and what they saw instead was, I think, about a 4% decrease in revenue, and so that created a 7% delta.
And I look forward to that confidence being reiterated in the summer. But thanks.
And John and I have worked on budgets before together, and we work really well with that. And our approach, and you'll see that in the when we do the 26 budget, is we like to budget conservatively on the revenue and high on the expenditures. And just in meet in the middle. And a lot of that is just based on because we have to allocate our funds to the state for our appropriations on what we spent. So you want to make sure that you're not going back to council often for revisions of that and public noticing that. So it's kind of a, it's a little bit of a dance in government when it comes to that.
Any other questions? All right, with that, the next topic is the municipal court IGA, and for that, I'll turn it over to our town manager, and if the chief wants to make any comments associated, I'm sure that's available as well.
I will let our town attorney talk about this. She did all the work on this. Figured that lawyers should work with the courts, and we do have our plans to do that.
Good afternoon, Council. Jennifer Madsen, Town Attorney. So in your packet is the final version of the Municipal Court IGA. This version is going to be approved by the Town of Silverthorne tomorrow evening, and I believe will be approved by Dylan soon.
It's going on the 8th.
Okay, on the 8th. So what the IGA does is really operates one municipal court for the 3 different municipalities, Silverthorne, Dillon, and Keystone. There will be one judge, and that judge is Ronald Carlson. There will be one prosecutor, Mark Hurlbert, and the staff that manages the court will all be the same, and those people are employed by Silverthorne, managed by Silverthorne as well. There are costs associated with this IGA. The costs are based on historical case volume. In the packet this afternoon, an additional document was provided that wasn't included in a previous work session, and that's the breakout for how the numbers were calculated for 2025 based on the historical docket for Silverthorne and Dillon. Dillon's fee for the judge and the prosecutor is a monthly fee at $2,999 per month, and that's based on their 50% volume of caseload. Under the way that the IGA is drafted is that because we don't have those historical figures for Keystone, Keystone won't have to pay the fixed cost for 2025, 26, and 27, but then we'll have to pay once that number is figured out for, once the percentage is figured out for the, in future years. So we'll have to pay up essentially in 2028 once we know what that historical figure was.
On that point, so we will probably accrue for 3 years some number maybe? I mean, otherwise we get a big lump sum that we're paying for, is that right?
Right, yeah, I mean, there's gonna have to be, we're gonna have to figure out how to do this so it's fair. You know, I can't imagine that Keystone is gonna have a huge number of tickets, at least for 2025, maybe there will be. But I would say it's, you know, it'll be a percentage of the docket, but there'll be some figuring out what that is and truing up that number then in 2028.
Kurt.
Can I read back what I think you said? So you can tell me whether I'm wrong or not. So there are fixed costs, even if there are no tickets that ever come, won't go into that court. Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. So it's the judge, the attorney, the prosecutor, and the court.
Down a little,
right?
just feedback.
Step right on. Thanks. But if the amount is paid by each of the 3 municipalities is split based on how much they use that so-called fixed cost, who's actually paying the check for the attorney and the...
Silverthorne is
Okay,
paying the
so
check.
they take the advance, and
Right.
we're essentially paying them back.
Yes, but there is a monthly cost. And essentially the way that it works is that it's a two-way process because there's fines that Silverthorne collects and court costs that Silverthorne collects. And so the amount of money that is taken in as fines versus the amount of money that is paid for fixed costs and then also the per ticket cost, that's subtracted. So the costs associated with running the court are subtracted from the fines and court costs collected from the defendants.
Okay,
what I understand from last year for Dylan, for example, is that they received approximately $66,000 in revenue from ticket fines and court costs, and their total payment essentially for that monthly cost and per ticket cost was $50,000. So they received $16,000 from Silverthorne.
Okay. Two more questions related. In the unlikely possibility that we would have no fines, nobody ever pulled over for anything for the rest of 2025, we would still be paying something for those?
No.
No, not until 2028.
Well, we won't be assigned a percentage of the docket if there are no tickets. The
So you don't have
percentage
to-
of the judge and the prosecutor is based on tickets written into court.
Okay. And why do they wait till for 3 years to do that? That's
That's
not
how it's
intuitive.
been done.
Okay.
Other questions? Councilmember Higgins?
Thank you. I have a couple. First, just, and I might have misread this, so I just want to more ask, section 3A where it says fixed cost. It talks about Dillon and Keystone shall pay to Silverthorne on a monthly basis that percentage of the fixed cost which equals the percent of Dillon court cases. Should that be Dillon and Keystone? Section 3A fixed cost.
Right.
I don't see a 3A.
In the,
Financial arrangements.
Financial arrangements, fixed
Yeah.
cost.
Fixed cost is, I don't have any letters.
oh no, page 3 of 10.
You're on the summary.
Ah, thank you.
Just, I guess, more of a question to put on your, and I'm not expecting an answer right now, but that, it just read weird to me.
Okay.
And then, is there an expected fixed cost increase? So with adding another town to this, are we expecting that the judge would be compensated for more hours worked? Do we need to hire more staff? Or are we basing this presumption on the current fixed cost, i.e. staff, would be able to absorb our caseload?
Well, I assume, and actually don't know, but I assume that the judge and the prosecutor are paid hourly. And that there will be more time associated with Keystone work. However, there will be efficiencies, economies of scale with 3 municipalities operating under the one IGA.
Gotcha. And then another one, so the per ticket cost at $95.39. I know we had talked about this before, but please just remind me, this cost is only for tickets that go to court, right? So if a police officer were to write a ticket for speeding and I just paid for it, we would not be subject to this $95 fee. It's only if I choose to fight it and go to court.
Actually, it is for tickets that are, that you pay with, you would pay the ticket with Silverthorne, and so it is included in those tickets as well.
Wow.
I thought,
I had said that previously, I misunderstood it, and I went back to the Silverthorne finance director, and she clarified that it's,
so all,
I can shed some light on that if you wish.
all right, please, chief.
So the cost per ticket, so if we have an officer that writes a speeding ticket, to use your example, that's for processing, all the things behind the scenes, so they take financial payment, close it out, deal with the back end of the court process of that. So that is something that is in each ticket.
So unlike
It's
most,
consistent, and actually the price from last year, if you look at the percentages that Dillon has historically been over 50% of their court services. Cost per ticket actually has gone down. So to your point of scale of that Some of those things actually may go down, some things may go up, like cost per hour of attorneys, I would imagine in the next year or 2 years or whatever, just what that looks like, we increase in some.
Do you have any, and again, I'm not looking for specific numbers, but do you have any idea of where that $95 goes? Is there a fee to file with DMV? Is there a fee to file with the state? Is there, like, that just seems a very high processing fee.
Sure, and the processing fees are relative to what it costs for staff to do certain things. That's the majority of the cost.
And it's also paying for staff time, it's paying for it's paying for the court clerk. So you have court clerks that are hired to run the court, and so it's paying for their salary.
So even if I don't show up to court, this per cost is almost like a fixed cost being distributed by the tickets?
It stays the same, and if you choose not to show up to court, actually their workload increases. So if you don't show up to court, then they have to go through the whole process of issuing a warrant for you, which also includes the judge's time and prosecutor time and staff time to make that happen.
I'm imagining not going to court, like I'll just pay out the fee, right?
Software package that's included for processing staff time is probably the biggest one. And then courts, RMS 360, which is the RMS record management system that actually runs that portion the entire.
And then could you give us an idea of, I'm going down the highway here and I'm going 55, so 10 over, right? What does the typical ticket look like with that? Would that be $150 to $200?
Because we need a budget.
You know, I don't want to tell you it's $75.
Actually, when we get a break, I will walk outside and physically get you a ticket and we will review all 4 of those things.
But so it
Do you have any answer?
would be above the cost of the ticket.
There are certain ordinances, and I can only speak for Dillon specifically, there are certain tickets that we will write that is under that. There are clearly other tickets that we write that are significantly over that.
So there is the
very showing scale.
Okay.
So something to keep in mind too, when if you know, you're setting fines, is this per ticket cost and also your fixed cost. However, there are, as I mentioned in the staff report, there are administrative costs that Keystone will recover as well for those appearance cases, people who appear.
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
Yes, so the costs are assessed against defendants for appearing in court, and what those are is there's an administrative cost of $80 for appearing in court, and court costs of $30 when the defendant sees the judge. So if you don't pay in advance, that's the benefit of paying in advance, is that you don't have to pay that administrative cost of $80 to talk to the prosecutor.
Now, what, the speeding ticket, right? And I go to court and I fight this, and I'm found not guilty or I win. Am I still liable for all those costs that you just mentioned?
No.
Okay. And so we as the town would have to pick that up if we're writing a bunch of tickets like a
Well, we don't pick up the $80 and $30.
Okay.
Those are added costs if you as a defendant contest your ticket and go to court.
And lose.
Yes.
Okay.
Or agree to a plea.
Okay. And then the unrelated direct cost, talking about jail time and other fees, that seemed very open-ended. I presume and hope we don't have the issue where we're going to be jailing a lot of people from Keystone. But is there any rough idea of what that administrative cost, unrelated direct cost as it's labeled here would be?
I can take that.
Thank you.
So I would agree with you. I hope that we're not having a carpool to the jail. The thing with the jail is they charge for their services too. Right? So if we end up holding somebody on a municipal charge of any way, shape, or form, we would be responsible for those costs. Why it is kind of open-ended of that is you may have 1 a year, you may have 10 a year. Some of the costs that you're not seeing involved with that is if they're housed in the jail on a court day, we have officers that have to go to the jail and produce that defendant in front of the court. Some of the other court costs that are not actually addressed in this, we actually staff court days. When you brought up the plea portion of that, the way that that court is run is officers actually deal with a lot of pleas. So there's more costs that are hidden in that we just absorb with that. But the jail-specific ones can get very expensive depending how long they're there and what that situation kind of looks like.
And so if they don't bond out, if they're held there for whatever reason, right, I presume we're paying them per day, per inmate situation?
It is, and the judge is very open to that. I mean, the majority, I would say the very strong majority of any kind of municipal charges that get taken to jail or have warrants for that, instantly get appealed on. So they're not necessarily incurring those costs, the majority of times.
Is there any ballpark number? Are we talking probably a couple thousand a year? Are we talking 100,000 a year? If we were to guess what that costs.
I will use us as an example. We probably have less than 5 in jail that we've incurred costs for 2024.
Okay.
And very short turnaround, especially with the way criminal laws are structured and advisements and what that looks like. Very, very short turnaround. So if you were to get taken to jail for something, it's most likely our officer potentially would give you a ride back.
Gotcha.
That's how the system in Colorado really is right now.
Okay. Thank you for all that information. Really appreciate it.
I would also say, in the future, when you're doing a ride along with your department, Wednesdays would be a great day because court days are on Wednesday mornings once a month.
Any other comments, any other questions? One note, Madam Attorney, on page, well, never mind, it's probably corrected in the actual text. I didn't see it, the text, sorry. So, we will be considering approval of the IGA during our council meeting this evening. So, last chance for any questions? Thank you, Chief. Next item is short-term rentals, and without turning it over to our town manager, we will punt.
And I will let our very talented town clerk, Madeline Seelu, explain what she's been doing for the last several months.
Before I go, I believe Julie is able to unmute herself now, if you wouldn't mind hearing the public comment.
Is that okay with the council?
Yes.
All right. Please, Julie, you may address the council.
All right, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Trying to turn on my camera for you as well. Am I sharing something? Well, I'll make this quick. My comment is actually to the noise ordinance coming up. I feel probably very strongly about this ordinance since we've become a town. My only call out, I really like the due diligence you all have done, but the 11 o'clock hour on Friday and Saturday, I really think we should stay by the county and stick with the 10. I only say that because, for one, we have to understand our residents here in Keystone. The majority of the people that live and work here, I would say, our hours usually shift to the weekend just because of business, whether it be hospitality or other services they are offering in the county. The second is I'm just down the street. I couldn't get to the council hall, if you will. But here in Loveland Pass Village is where I'm getting at. Is you all know our variances. All of us built beyond our property or where we were allowed. So we all have a variance within our property lines. All of our houses are pretty much to the edge. So if you put in a hot tub, let's say, which I do have one behind my house, it's practically like that hot tub's in my bedroom. I can hear people talk, and the only thing that really saves me during this is that I have a 10 o'clock stop time. I haven't had to call the police or anything like that, but this also goes into that we have to understand the limits we set. And kind of funny that John brought up about going over the speed limit. People will go over the limit of the noise ordinance. So if we set 11, most likely people will stay out until 11:30, which to me, that is by far way too late. I hope all those are taken into consideration. And I mean, lastly, to me, if we set ordinances, we set laws, it's easier to become more relaxed versus tighten. So I truly feel we should just set it at 10, keep it at what the county's at. Every resident, short-term renter here in Keystone already abides by the 10 p.m. hour. So can we just keep it as is? If we really need to go to 11, then I think that should be a decision made by the people that live here with a vote. And that's it. Thank you for letting me speak. Yeah, I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Julie. Now, back to the short-term rentals.
All right, good evening, Mayor, Town Council. My name is Maddie Ciolu. I am the Town Clerk of Keystone. I have put together a basic overview of kind of short-term rental operations over this first year. We talked about at the last work session, having short-term rental community listening sessions and getting feedback from those listening sessions. We did start with our first listening session last week on Thursday. We predominantly had STR property owners in attendance, but we had a good turnout and some good communication and conversation. The recap of those conversations will happen at the end of May, and this staff report is more focusing on just the operations as a whole, so you can be in tune with what kind of happened this season and what might come up at these meetings in advance. So as of late last week, there were 1,948 active short-term rental licenses within the town, and the licensing process has been overwhelmingly working smoothly from the perspective of town staff. There have been some things that we learned in the first year of implementation about what improvements could be made to the software system and some small tweaks along through that process. But primarily the licensing piece, I think, was working well in the first year. One improvement that we're really focusing on, we just started phase 2 of the licensing program development with Blue Vector. And one of the things that we're focusing on is making the experience for property management companies and their renewal a little bit smoother and quicker. Last year, I took on a lot of the burden of having them submit an updated spreadsheet and then had to kind of manually import that spreadsheet into the system. So that took a lot of staff time to double check and get input into the system. And the bulk of our licenses are handled that way by being registered for by those property management companies. So I think that improvement should really help with staff time per application when we're processing, but it will also really help with the time for those property management companies as well. And so that is the vast majority of the licenses that we're dealing with in that renewal period. And I believe if that gets a little bit easier and cleaned up, that will make the amount of time spent on that be able to be spent in other parts of the process and focus more on that enforcement piece in the upcoming years. The other thing I think that we learned this year is there are a lot of kind of quirks of the data that we got over from Summit County, and that had to be kind of fixed and addressed as we were getting people into the system and kind of changing those things over and getting it updated. And so those quirks, I think, also contributed to a lot more time for users and time for staff, and that back and forth between one another. So I think that will also kind of improve in year 2, just a little bit more naturally. Other improvements that we're working on for the licensing piece is just clarifying the data model. Right now, it gets a little bit wonky between the application and the license data, and that is, you know, it means that the application data needs to be fully isolated from the license data so that we are not touching the applications that have been submitted to us, and that the integrity of that database is good. That's something that we've been working on, making that a more automated piece, that those two things are totally separate and not being changed. And so that is going to be improved in year 2 as well. The third thing is incorporating regular updates between the Summit County Assessor's data and the system database. So we have gotten the Summit County Assessor's Office to give us a monthly spreadsheet to reconcile versus our database and pull some of that information in to our database to double check and have validation criteria against the data that we already have. So that will also help with a lot of the cleanup of the data and just making things a little bit more accurate and consistent in the way that they live in our database. So those are kind of the key improvements, and these are things that staff has already been working with Blue Vector on developing. Essentially, we've been going through like sprint cycles and like the agile process with their development team. Every 2 weeks, we work on one of these things. Then for the enforcement piece, just to kind of give you folks an overview of how things have gone with the implementation of the hotline. We did provide in the packet a log of the hotline complaints and kind of tried to group those together as unique incidents so that if something was a repeating issue that was happening in a condensed time period, we had an idea that, okay, these things are related, and just made it easier to read. I know that there have been some logs going around that were released via core requests, and I'd just like to address that these logs are just the logs as they exist in the system. And so what staff did is kind of provide that context for them that didn't exist in the system. So just context there about why that looks that way. And during this first season, I think the hotline has provided staff with some insight on common issues and some of the difficulties that come up with enforcing things. I think one thing that was really a recurring issue was parking plans and parking enforcement. So I think looking at what we want to request from people for the submission of their parking requirements and asking for diagrams to go along with that. The data that we got over from Summit County, what they requested for people from for that parking plan was just the general description of how many spaces inside versus outside. So that made it very difficult when we're looking at that to address the specific parking concerns that might come up. And then because of some of the difficulties with enforcement, the thing that we primarily focused on from my perspective was the requirement for the responsible agent to affirmatively respond to the hotline or staff within 1 hour of receiving the complaint, because this metric is standard and something that we can utilize to follow up on clearly when we're looking at that. So I think there are some refinements and improvements that we can make with Deckard on how that process works. I think we learned a couple things about how that data is read by the people in the hotline and how they actually identify those properties. And sometimes it's difficult to identify properties in Keystone. And there are 2 reasons for this, or at least 2 reasons for this. One is that the legal addresses in Keystone for certain buildings do not match with the posted addresses. And we did talk about this at one of the last short-term rental updates. So the Gateway building, for example, their legal address might be unit 201, but the unit number on the door is going to be something like 5032. And they don't correspond in a numerical order either. So getting that data with our licensing straightened out will also help kind of improve that in future years. And then the second reason is it's just difficult for people who aren't familiar with the area to be able to identify the exact street address if you're in a complex with multiple different units. And so getting that exact address was difficult. So we're working with Deckard to identify if it's possible to get them to remap the data to just be associated with the subdivision, which in most cases would be the building name or the HOA name, and the posted unit number. And that's something that they are working on right now. In relation to the STR identification software associated with Deckard, we have not focused a lot on that piece of the enforcement, but I did actually talk with Heike earlier today about the utilization of that for some of the lodging tax compliance pieces. And if someone indicates to us that they are not actively renting their short-term rental, we are able to go into our system and very easily search that address and see, okay, this does have a live listing, or okay, this does not, and that was useful. So we haven't had a ton of focus on that piece because during year one, I think we were focusing on some of the more immediate concerns with getting the licensing system up and running and then the addressing the hotline complaints. But I do think that there is value in that identification system, and it has been easy to use and user-friendly from that perspective. So that's kind of an overview of what happened with short-term rentals this season and where we're at. I don't think that we need any direction from council right now on what direction to go, but I just wanted folks to be aware of what might come up at these listening sessions and what information the public is being presented with as well.
Questions? Councilmember Kerr?
You had mentioned getting a monthly Excel sheet that you compare against. It sounds like in this first year, there's been a lot of manual applications, so I love you for that. But what is it? Did you say that was coming from the county?
Yes, so the Summit County Assessor's Office has all of the property owner information, and that is going to be something that would be data we could only get from the Assessor's Office. But that will also help us from a compliance perspective of knowing, oh, this month the unit sold to a new property owner, and we need to reach out and say, this license is deactivated for this unit, and we need to get a new license for the new owner if they're still renting.
That's good to know. The reason I was looking at this piece is about that grading service or identity service. It sounds to me, please tell me if I'm hearing this wrong, that you don't think it's time to make a decision about continuing that. You need at least another year under your belt, and or maybe the county's system is effective for that purpose.
So I would say that they're not duplicative in the things that they're offering. The county service just gives us information about ownership and the addresses. And so it's more about cleaning up the integrity of the ownership and address identification pieces of it. But the STR identification software from Deckard is the piece that gives us all of that information and takes in daily scrapes of those different listing sites.
And that you recommend that we continue with so far?
That would be my initial first impression. I think that there is additional use for that, especially as we continue to just kind of hone things and get everyone into compliance.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Sullivan?
When we originally decided to go with the hotline, the people hotline, there was concern that, will people use it? Really, is it necessary? It appears that the volumes are, people are understanding it's out there and we're starting to use it. Do you have any metrics as to, are we using it more? How does it compare to last year with the kind of goofy systems that we were using?
Yes, so with Summit County's numbers that they reported to us last year, they had 17 complaints throughout the course of a similar time period. I will say I think that it's difficult to look at that number and get a very accurate feel of whether or not that is truly how many complaints they received within the town of Keystone. One difference between the way our reporting works in the Deckard software and then the reporting for the county is if they can't identify a specific address or license associated with the complaint, that doesn't get reported and generated into the report. And so the data that we got from Summit County were only those that were identified addresses. And so I would hypothesize that there might be more, but I can't be certain. But all of that to say, I do think we have more than 17 complaints that we received this year.
Councilman, you were hanging up.
Thanks. I really appreciate the details you've included here, especially the breakdown of what all, I think that's huge. And I also think you hit the nail on the head perfectly about calling out that there's little feedback provided from the system that was mentioned in one of the resolutions / recaps. So I think that those are two really great areas to just call out. I did want to kind of on the record and just ask this, right? When we have a resolution noted as property was contacted and responded to the hotline within 1 hour, that doesn't necessarily mean that the issue has been resolved within that hour, right? That means that the responsible agent has been contacted?
Correct.
Okay.
The responsible agent has been contacted and affirmatively responded to the hotline.
And using an example that is called out in here, if there's a unit that is impacting another unit, let's say water is leaking into there, or there's another impact, right? It is not necessarily the town's responsibility to ensure that the water is fixed or the issue's fixed. It's more, we're responsible for notifying the agent or the property about the issue, right?
I don't know that I could speak to the responsibility piece and what the implication of that might be, but I would say that the expectation of what I've communicated with the hotline is that they are calling the responsible agent and notifying them of the issue.
Okay. And just for our awareness with the call center, it seems like a lot of these are through the call center. Is that a situation where every single time somebody calls out, they get a hold of a physical agent or a person, or is there a voicemail that's left and somebody has to interpret what's said afterwards?
My interpretation of the hotline is that our hotline provides a live agent to every call. It is possible that someone could wait on the hold line for that agent for a while. But we do not automatically send people to voicemails if all agents are currently on the line.
Okay. And then my last question, again, circling back to the feedback on complaints, is there any process that we're currently looking at for, like let's say I make a complaint about my neighbor or just an STR in town, right? Is there a process we're looking at for follow-up on, like even if it's an email confirmation, like we got your point, thank you so much.
Yes, so I do think those are things that we are improving. The online form, we're already working on improvements for that piece. And then also working on additional scripting with the call center folks to affirmatively indicate to people, you know, if this issue isn't resolved within an hour, please call us back to report it again. And working on that kind of workflow on the back end in the system of what happens after staff is notified and clicks a button in the system to say what the resolution is or what kind of communication would go out to follow up with the complainant.
Is there any way that we can adjust the script even further, and once somebody, like, let's say I'm a call center employee and I get a hold of the responsible agent, can we have the expectation be where I give the reporting party a call back and let them know, hey, this is the resolution? Because I think that that would go miles right now with the feedback we're getting from this.
So I have asked Deckard that, the meeting in which I asked them whether or not that could be as part of our 3 follow-up calls. I think that the language of 3 follow-up calls is vague enough that if they only use 1 call with the responsible agent, they could potentially use a follow-up call to reach back out to the complainant. But that was a meeting I had with them on Monday, and they are speaking with the rest of the internal team at Deckard to see whether or not that's possible.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Town Manager?
Yeah, we probably want to set up something where they could choose premises.
Can you clarify that?
Yeah, now you lost me.
Okay, so before we did not, the ordinance was not written in to care about who heard the sound. It was written about where the sound was generated. And the measurement should have been 25 feet from the property line of the premise where the sound is being emitted. I'm just reading here, and I have receptor premises rather than emitter. We have a second option written in that paragraph, or within the property line of the receptor premises as determined at the town's discretion. I also need to have language that if measured at the receptor premises, the levels required, the zone of the receptor premise levels shall be mandated. So if a commercial premise emits the noise, receptor premise is residential, receives the noise, they use the receiving level. This gives discretion to law enforcement but tries to address the problem, which is who hears the sound.
So, we're taking out, just to dumb it down for me. I know we had talked a lot back and forth last meeting about where it's being emitted from and where it's being received from, and we use Loveland Pass Village as an example, right? Am I understanding this correctly, in that there would be 2 possible ways to enforce this, both, and let's use the goat as an example, right? We can measure the sound at the goat, and if it's above that for commercial, then that would be a violation, or we can measure that from my house porch, and if that's higher than the residential, then that's also a violation.
Correct.
Okay, and what would happen if the goat is within compliance of commercial, but it's louder than the residential in my house?
Impossible.
Is that impossible?
Like physically impossible. Like,
Well, quite possibly if residential is built too close to the goal, not multifamily, but strictly residential, that could happen, it won't happen. What this will allow more so, I think, is enforcement and discretion in multi-unit dwellings.
just to further clarify, because I get what Councilmember Hagman is trying to get at, which is like what happens when you're complying with one and not the other. And I should clarify my statement. The reason it's impossible is because sound falls off the square of distance, so it falls off rapidly. So if you are taking a lower measurement from much farther away, the distance will drop that sound much more than the difference between the lanes.
And
It is possible you could actually be violating the commercial if, when measured 25 from the property line, whereas if you went over your house, they'd be in compliance there. But if there's no way you can comply with commercial while violating the residential at large distance.
And actually, to kind of, the real reason it's impossible is because the ordinance calls for the town to use one or the other measurements. So we're not going to take a measurement 25 feet off the property line and take a measurement at the receptor property. So it would be one or the other.
And that would be at the discretion of the enforcement agent, whether that's a police officer or a town employee or whatever it is?
Correct.
So then let me further clarify that. So two questions. One, when you say 25 feet along the property line,
It should be from the property line of the emitter premises.
And then I guess my question here is, you're leaving the choice of whether to measure the receptor property under their criteria or the emitter under their criteria, and that's at discretion. Well, the example that Councilmember Hagenow gave is not possible technically. I could see situations. So what do you do if you have residential that does abut a commercial property? Do we just get to apply the commercial limits to the residential?
Well, even more so than this. Let's talk multifamily dwellings,
Okay.
where you have two residentials that abut each other. Okay. Clearly, you're not going to have 25 feet of separation. You could be next unit over. You could have skipped the receiving unit who's complaining about it. Well, at that point, I think it's the police discretion. A child playing in a room might make noise you hear. That's something you might have to expect in a condominium. Someone cranking their stereo speaker against the wall is not necessarily something we should expect in a condominium. We have to allow discretion at that point. Otherwise, multi-unit dwellings are just going to be a nightmare of enforcement.
I think you're right about that. I think that if we really wanted to have something that was suited for multi-unit dwellings, we might need to pull from some urban ordinances that kind of specifically address how different limits and how they're measured. Because trying to apply something that works well in a townhomes or single-family home neighborhood, you're right, is going to be problematic. I guess my question, and so I would personally put a pin in your excellent point there. I guess my question is, what do you do if, say, if you do have a commercial property that does abut a residential property? It would seem to me that the residential, if it's high enough for the residential recipient, then that should have supremacy.
Same sort of thing, discretion. To me, this is the people who build their houses right next to the airport and then complain about the noise at the airport. If I convert a property above a commercial property to residential, my expectation shouldn't be the same as if a lot of commercial moves in next door. That's where the discretion can come into play to some extent.
I think your point's well taken. I think that there ought to be some guidance because, like, the difference between a residential unit above and R is, so say there was housing above the goat, which actually I think there is, but those people live there. But that's different than, say, commercial lot next to a residential lot. So that's, I get the need for discretion, but there ought to be some guidance perhaps.
It really does need to be a case-by-case situation, I would think. Anything above, when we talk about above, those multi-mixed use are commercial, designated commercial. Do you have any thoughts on, we're talking noise ordinance?
No, I think everybody's point of view is really well thought out. It's, to your point, it's super challenging to enact some kind of ordinance that is unenforceable. But that's easy to say that unless, if you're the person that's calling or lives there, that's really challenging. To your point, in the way that sound travels and how you measure it and how you prepare for the courtroom setting, it is really challenging on the enforcement piece of that. A lot of time, it could be good communication strategies. You know, enforcement really would come at the end of that if there's no other, you know, no thought that goes into your neighbors and what that looks like. And, but it does happen all the time, right? Because you're very confined space. I mean, you're in a valley too, so noise, concerts and other bigger events that I think is addressed in there. Having some latitude to do certain things that yet could still go forward in a court, I think should really be weighed upon. I'm not going to say one way or the other about your policy decisions of that, but the things I look at, you know, is it enforceable? You know, is it consistent? You know, and it could be consistent today, but, you know, when you look at development and what that looks like, you know, to your point, I think that that's a fascinating point of view. You know, if you're choosing to build above a bar, nightclub, dance club, open space, I mean, all of that stuff plays into that. So the more discretion we have, but being able to get it in front of a court, so being defined enough where you can hit the elements of that is, I think, fairly necessary.
And if I may weigh in a little bit more, Councilmember Parmet, this might help. Speaking about difficulty in court, our attorney and I discussed earlier today about possibly adding a section that just bans unreasonable noise. That's what the town of Silverthorne does, the state of Minnesota, a few jurisdictions, not a lot. But it's difficult to, that becomes the judge's determination on, is the officer correct and that's unreasonable or is it?
Well, I think that makes sense, and I think it goes in right back to what you were saying, where especially that, I think it's hard to like hold in the court, but a lot of this is empowering law enforcement to reference, hey, there's a rule about this and we think you're violating. Most things should be resolved through a conversation, not a courtroom. But giving, as I think you said, clear and consistent. So I guess one piece on the multi-dwelling units, if we think that's going to be a concern, that we might want to pull something from an urban ordinance that has something that says, and this is what we do with multi-dwelling units, if we think that's worth our time. But the question that I keep coming back to is, I don't know, let's say the Texaco is turned into a nightclub, and there's the employee housing behind it. What I'm looking for is the consistency of where you have a commercial lot that abuts a residential lot. And so if it's at discretion, what happens when at one point someone says, oh, well, the commercial, we're going to measure it for commercial. And then the next week someone says, oh, we're going to apply the residential rule here.
It would have to do with the type of noise. If it's the same noise being emitted, I'm hoping our enforcement wouldn't change from week to week on how we approach that specific location. You know, it's a tough line. There's no perfect solution. Right now, it's easy enough because the receptor property at the Texaco is more than 25 feet away. But what if they develop in the parking lot backing up to the Texaco property? It's a tough situation, but I think if we start trying to address every conceivable situation, we'll get our hands tied with existing situations. And I'd rather readdress the ordinance at a time when those problems pop up.
Reasonable, thank you.
Councilmember Hagan.
Thanks. I tend to agree with the Councilmember Parmet with the idea of looking at more like city or urban-based approaches, but I also say that with a big grain of salt in the fact that I don't want to overlay legislate this. And I still remember the town manager mentioning a couple of meetings ago that our ordinance here is already very much more extensive than other towns. And so I guess my concern with that is more of a foundational question, right? We are spending a lot of time talking about this, legislating potential ordinances and all this for, and I'll take the words from Councilmember Parmet, for an issue that I don't know if we necessarily have, right? Do we think that if we have a more simple ordinance, that we're gonna have a bunch of people that are reading it on page 7, they're like, oh, 26 feet away now, it's not gonna be an issue. Like, I guess, do we think it's gonna be an issue? It is foundational. Do other towns have issues in county? I like the idea of simple language, but then also there's the potential where people are unreasonable with what they think is reasonable sound. So I guess more just foundationally the question of, is it an issue? Are we over legislating this? And that's a concern I have with this.
Mark, answer the question.
It is an issue. We saw it in our SDR logs, and that's without us having a noise ordinance as it is. The receptor premise as determined at the town's discretion is actually the language Denver uses to address multi-unit dwellings in their noise ordinance. I think it's important, as the chief said, we need something so that he and his officers can walk up and discuss the issue with the people who are a problem. But they also need something that's concrete enough so that if they don't resolve the issue, they can fall back on the ordinance itself.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to get at, right, is for me, it seems more the time, right? The time, and if it looks like a duck, it walks like a duck, it smells like a duck, it's a duck. If it's too loud, if it's obnoxious, like, right, I think that we have a lot of smart people that can look at that and be like, this is unreasonable. And I guess my issue is I'm seeing us get bogged down with these super technical DBA and EBC and all this kind of stuff, and I really like the idea of just the simple, is it causing an issue? Is it impacting other people? Like, simple.
Councilmember Kerr.
Yeah, I think this is a conversation, a discussion we're having. When we first looked at this a few weeks ago, I approached it with a lot of trepidation because I thought what we were trying to resolve, what we had talked about for months, was quite simple. We wanted to ensure that there were no jake breaks and that people were not partying too loudly at night and bothering their neighbors. This is so much more than that. I don't know that it's wrong, however, and I say that because I reached this conclusion before Kel summarized it so succinctly. I was concerned when we created the original ordinance about nuisances that we not put too much in the town manager's lap to have to adjudicate and become a judge instead of doing this town manager. So I think we do need more, but I actually wonder if the policies we are looking at could be a little bit simplified. This is kind of like legal language, and the bottom line, maybe a summary statement on the top. Bottom line, when people say, well, what's the noise policy? Nobody's going to pull out 13 pages. We need to be able to communicate it clearly and effectively. If you would take that under consideration.
I think Carol's point is well taken. I think if you look at like Denver, Colorado Springs, lots of other towns do, is on the website, they're like noise ordinance. And it's a little, very simple Q&A. What does this actually mean? Very easy to digest. And here also is the noise ordinance if you want to read the technical side, because you could just go with a one-liner that said any noise that's unreasonable, but that doesn't provide a lot of guidance in it. And I'm sure that council will tell us that if it does go, if you do end up in a courtroom, that one's a lot harder to defend than I measured a sound level according to these standards and this ordinance. So I think you need both those tools, because unreasonable sound is, or whatever the verbiage is a great conversation starter when an officer is trying to solve a problem. That's probably a lot harder in the courtroom, and then we hand the tools of measurement and levels over for when they're like, well, it's not just my opinion, I measured it, and here's what the rules say. I imagine that can help a discussion.
Jennifer, did you have?
No, I don't really have anything. I mean, I think with the, I said no, and then I go on, but with the unreasonable ordinance, typically what I've seen in my experience is then you have to have people who are willing to be witnesses in court. It's not just the police officer who is testifying as to his or her opinion, but it's also the complainant who would then have to appear in court and say, explain what the situation was.
So are we generally okay with the measurement, the way it's written with those corrections?
You said we'll talk about DBA versus DBC.
That's coming up.
Okay, so next, table A, 2 issues to talk about here.
Before you talk DBA, DBC, we had a comment that came in today asking for residential, I assume, because of Love and Fast Village, to go, to stay at 10 a.m. versus 11 a.m. We addressed this before, PM, yeah, 11 versus 10 versus 11. When we were addressing this before, we were predominantly saying that limit at 11, thinking about the commercial application with condos on top of it, but that qualifies by the definition as a commercial. Like River Run would be, all of River Run would be classed as commercial, as we're looking at it. So I guess if I listened to Julie Suter, I could be convinced to break out residential from that and have a residential 10 p.m. limit versus an 11. And I don't know what the other thoughts of council members are.
I believe I was the one that originally proposed the 11 o'clock, and I'm in agreement with the mayor that that was the intent.
Yeah. So would it be possible to break that out if other folks agree?
I wholeheartedly agree, and I think if you look at like Denver, Colorado Springs, most other like urban areas have their limits starting at 9 or 10, not 11, for residential.
Yeah. And because we won't have the major noisemakers there, which would be the businesses or the people patronizing those businesses you're talking about. Single-family homes like in Loveland Pass or condominiums.
Right, and particularly the Loveland Pass Village, where you do have the short-term rentals operating, and you've got kids trying to go to bed, you've got people working weekend shifts. I think it's appropriate to not have it. I mean, I'm even arguing for 9, but 10 can be it.
Good way to make 10 look like a compromise.
Yeah, and is there any reason to have weekends split up differently?
I think for commercial, not for residential. For commercial, I think the answer may be yes.
So what should the hours be for commercial, or the noise level?
7 to 7. The commercial should be 11 p.m. for commercial, 10 p.m. for residential.
Yeah.
On a weekend.
And that's on weekdays too, though, correct?
Weekday and weekday. Residential.
Yeah.
10 p.m. cutoff.
10 p.m. on weekday for residential, 11 p.m. on weekend?
No.
Well, that's where our voting position was, but there's been 2 comments to support 10.
10 for
So there is no reason to differentiate
Right.
weekends
For residential.
for residential.
For commercial, yes.
Well, what would you like the difference to be for commercial?
11 p.m.
Keep the 11 that you had.
So right now, There's no difference between Sunday through Thursday and Friday through Sunday.
Correct.
But I am going to change it for residential. It will be 10 p.m. Sunday through Saturday.
Right.
Commercial, 11 p.m. Sunday through Saturday.
10 during the week.
Can I try that? Okay. What I believe we're all saying is that we want residential to be the same all week. Yes, 10 o'clock. For commercial, we're saying for the weekend, it goes from 10 to 11. But during the week, it's still 10. Is that correct?
Correct.
Wait, 10 is
No, we've been talking about 11 o'clock for commercial
10 all week.
all week. That's what it says right now.
That's what it says, but I thought we were talking about,
The discussion only talked about residential, so now if commercial is on the plate.
yeah,
10 is clearly,
for commercial.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Because restaurants close at 10.
I don't think anybody
That means
proposed
people
10
leaving
for
restaurants will be.
I
Seriously.
think we're talking about 11 o'clock for commercial.
So, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Maybe not everybody's agreeing,
The
but
question
commercials,
they might ask is, do you want to give us
All week.
leeway till
All week.
midnight?
residential, yeah, all week.
Okay.
That makes sense. Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah, for me, all I'm really seeing that this does is, commercial still has that leeway later on, but it just knocks down the residential side, so where STRs are impacting those communities, right? I still remember Councilmember Sullivan talking about the weddings at Ski Tip, for example, and as long as, in my mind, as long as that's still allowed to go till 11 o'clock, then that's completely okay, because it'd be commercial, right? At that point.
Right.
Perfect.
Councilmember Kerr.
So as a test of our understanding, essentially we're saying that throughout the town in residential areas, quiet hours begin at 10 p.m. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So since we have not yet distinguished commercial versus residential zones in our land use code, right?
We do in this ordinance.
That's what I'm saying. So I'd like to go back to, I think it's section 3B, where it talks about commercial zone.
Yep.
And if I could just test my understanding. So if I live in the condos that are directly across from the mountain base ski area, do I understand myself to be in a commercial zone? Because we talked about that last time around.
You know, you brought this up, I'm very glad you brought this up, because actually looking at commercial zone, I think number 2 has to be taken right out. Within walking distance.
Yeah, because that makes a lot in there.
Yeah.
Pretty much all the tax, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I live in, I don't know, is it Chateau Mont that's right across?
Yeah.
Am I considered part of the Keystone Resort commercial zone? I think I'm living in a residential
Yeah,
area.
because you're a multi-dwelling unit.
Well,
Just tell
not
me where I am
multi-use.
on this list,
Yeah.
if not, if any.
7.
Yeah, am I right? Let me try to.
Yeah.
If a building has, if a commercial, like we're looking at River Run, you have commercial on the bottom floor, residential on the top floor, that's a commercial building.
That's a mixed-use building.
Mixed use, that's commercial. If
But
you-
that's why I came up with this example, which is not as easy.
Well,
Because,
in that case, I would interpret it to mean the Chateau de Mont would be residential,
Yeah.
and the River Run would be commercial.
no, and Councilmember Hagan got it. The Mountain House Base area is a commercially dominated area
All right,
with a multiple dwelling unit in it, even though it's not mixed use. My interpretation would be that Chateau de Mont is in a commercial area because it's built in a commercially dominated area. And there are a few complexes, I don't know their names of, at Lakeside, for instance, that are not mixed use. They're strictly residential buildings, but it's a commercially
you're talking about the buildings along the lake.
Yeah,
So all those condos around the lake will be considered part of the commercial district because of the lodge
well,
Oh, we could-
and a pizza place? I'm not arguing, I'm trying to understand.
And the restaurant and rec center over where Brunswick used to be. And the lakeside area is a transforming, evolving neighborhood. It clearly used to be a commercially dominated area. It would have to take some analysis and thought.
Well,
Okay.
are those areas not all commercial because they're multi-unit dwellings? Like, every building there has multiple units in it, except for very few townhomes, right?
Well, it has to be a commercially dominated area with multiple dwelling units. So for instance, these condos across the street, across Highway 6 here, are not in what I would call a commercially dominated area, but they're all multiple dwelling units. So
Okay.
the units from basically across the road here from Dakota Hill, almost down to the goat would be residential in my opinion.
My question would be like, so Lakeshore, Lakeside have commercial businesses
Yeah.
in the base of the structure. Okay, that makes sense, that it's a mixed use and therefore commercial. If you keep going along in the village, we get over to Decatur and Montezuma, these are like hundreds of meters from the closest business and don't have any commercial in the building.
And that's why I said, in the past, they certainly were not hundreds of meters.
And quite frankly, if we were to use that as an example, the minute you try to apply either the 25 feet or the distance from like a pizza shop to way over there is gonna negate the problem.
Yeah, it'll be the residential reading. No, it won't it will, this is discretion, and this is going and saying, you're in this building here and there's no commercial anywhere around you. I am sad about that fact, but the noise level here is residential.
Okay, that's good.
Councilmember Hagan.
One thing that I do want to talk about here is I think we should be very tactical in including that short-term rentals do not designate a commercial area.
Yeah.
It's funny you should say that, because I was just about to ask our town clerk, is there anything here that complicates the communication you would give to SDR owners? I'm sorry, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but you need to make sure that.
She probably hasn't.
I haven't looked at it that in depth, but I would say that it should be consistently applied across areas. So it would make sense that it applied to short-term rentals the same as it does to other places.
So the tricky part that
consistently.
we say we'll have to make this distinction between an STR in a commercially dominated area and an STR in a predominant in a residential area.
So the fact the unit is a short-term rental is not the only reason to determine its zoning status.
It's irrelevant.
It's irrelevant.
We basically, the way STRs follow the taxing,
What I'm trying to avoid,
they're residential there. They don't follow the taxing because they're taxed as residential and commercial districts too, but.
what I'm trying to avoid is an STR, and they're being in Loveland Pass Village, being in a quiet community, and being, well, I'm a hotel motel-like business, and that qualifies me as a commercial,
And
so.
that's easy to stick that line in.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
All right, that's good. Okay, let's talk DBA, DBC. Councilmember Parmet brought up that DBC might be a better measurement than DBA because it gives the non-audible levels, reads them at a higher level.
Can I clarify, it's not non-audible levels, it's just things that are outside of the primary human response within the ear. But low frequency from subwoofers, absolutely well perceived by humans, but is ignored by DBA.
Well, it's not ignored by DBA.
It's attenuated at like if you go to 20 hertz, it's attenuated at like 30 decibels. That's basically ignoring it.
So if I can go into this, I dove into this. Actually, first I just went through and made the changes. Then I dove into it and realized I could not find another municipality or government anywhere that didn't use DBA, because that's what ANSI recommends, because DBA more closely mimics normal human hearing. And the DBC actually flattens out some of the levels that are within the normal hearing range and raises the level of the high pitch and very low frequency and very high frequency sounds. I'm not sold on any of this. I have no problem switching back to DBC, but what sold me was the fact that I couldn't find another government that used DBC for their general noise ordinance issues. Certainly industry issues like that.
Darren, can I ask you a question? I was not a STEM kid, so if you could set aside the discussion, the description, which I think is very valid because I don't know how to question it. Could you give us an example of what changes with an actual noise going from A to B or vice versa?
So if we take human conversational voices, it's going to be measured, A or C, it's going to be measured within a decibel or two, most likely.
Okay.
If you measure really high frequency, then that might be registered, what could be 90 in dBc could be like 30 in dBA.
For example?
I don't think that the high frequency is a good example because that's not generally something that...
What about a chainsaw?
The chainsaw is going to be broad spectrum. I think the biggest example is going to be subwoofers. So DBA is not going to capture a
car when you're sitting in a parking lot and
Yeah.
doing the whole...
Or the condo.
Right.
It's the condo.
And particularly, even if it's like a broad spectrum noise source from within a building, the bass can emanate outside and affect the property, whereas like most of the DBA frequency is going to be contained within. So the example I give is like someone could be vibrating the dishes off of your countertop, and that won't necessarily register on the DBA scale, but it would on C, because it's really low frequency. And so ANSI recommended DBA because it is a relatively good proxy for the human hearing response of all the little hairs in our ears and how those vibrate. And most of the sound ordinances that were created in the 70s, and not everyone could just go down to Walmart and buy a subwoofer that's loud enough to light up the whole street for $200. Now it's quite affordable to have those things. So I think when towns revise their noise ordinances, they'll often do something with consideration of bass. Or if they're making new ones, they'll do DBC. I can provide examples of where municipalities do use DBC, including examples where they had an existing one and then added DBC in as a second scale that could be used when the complaint was around bass, and they even used slightly different thresholds. So there's a lot of ways to attack it. I think just going to A makes it so that you can only fall back on the unreasonable noise if someone is cranking their subwoofer. That's the simplest way to put it.
But doesn't falling back on reasonable noise cover that?
Well, anything could cover that, but it means there's no real good way to measure it. And it makes it, as our council has pointed out, much harder if you do have to adjudicate the matter, because then you have to get a complaint to show up to court or something. But it's easier, I think, if the officers try to problem solve and like, hey, it's loud. Well, I don't think it's unreasonable. Well, I measured it and it is.
What I've seen when I've done a little bit of research this week on DBA, DBC, is the towns that have used DBC actually have two different standards. They have a DBA standard and a DBC standard. They don't have used the same level. And I guess the question is it something we want to address now? how frequent, because really what the issue you're talking about is a issue associated with base.
So can I suggest a simple solution would be, just as there's one line that says if there's like percussive or staccato or an intermittent sound, and we adjust it by 5 dB, could we just have a line that says, if the complainant or the responding officer determines that this is a base frequency complaint, use EBC and add 5 decibels to the limit?
That sounds reasonable.
I guess I'd ask the chief, what do you think, chief?
I just have a really quick question of how are people measuring the C?
So on your meter, you just flip mode and it flips, you can go unweighted, DBA, or DBC. It just changes the scale.
Even my free metric off of apps gives me that option.
Yeah, we actually just ordered new meters, so I'm curious to see what that picture looks like.
They'll definitely have it, so. That makes sense to me, if that sounds good to the council, to have one like that, rather than trying to send new.
Correct.
Yeah, it seems simple.
Yeah. And that way it's under, a fear I had was confusion. If we have all these different levels out there, if someone actually cares about them and the noise they're producing, it's going to create confusion. But this would work. And the discretion is enabled in that too. See, other than that, I added the vehicles generally stay the same, modeled after the state and federal regulations.
So on that, you've got the pre and post 1973. There were actually additional changes in 1979, but I believe 1988 is the number that we should have in there, because that's where it changes to medium and heavy trucks to 80 decibels.
I did this to model after the state statute so that we don't have a law change when you.
But I'm telling you the federal EPA ones, so if the state's behind, that shouldn't put us behind, because there is a superseding agency setting that standard, and I'll send you the webpage from the EPA standard.
I'll have no problem adding those to make sense.
Other comments?
This has been a lot of work, John, thank you.
Let's see, scroll down then, exemptions. I took out the commercial and residential properties. And I did add, let me see. L, noise from snow plowing and removal, long maintenance, street cleaning, or trash collection.
Yes.
And then I also, under alarms, said alarms required to be turned off by emergency services are exempt from this section. Sure. So, any other changes? Any? This is ready with this
You
year.
have enough?
Yep.
Do you think you will go directly to a first reading or come back?
I think we're okay going to a first reading.
I agree.
All right. All right. Councilmember Hagan,
I want to ask a question. I know we had spent a few minutes talking about the exception last time for snow removal on maintenance. I tend to remember that there was a conversation about putting some kind of limits on there. I just want to make sure everyone's comfortable. I'm reading this as a blanket exception, so I could go mow my lawn at 3 a.m. in the morning.
I'm comfortable with that.
I'm okay with that too. I just want to make sure we're not putting a wall.
This is where we rely on the general ordinance that gives the town manager some discretion.
Yeah, or maybe for L, I put reasonable noise.
If you want to steal one, Denver had a really good one in there. It was basically during snow emergencies or during these hours or town approved equipment or something, I forget what it said.
No, we gotta
That makes
designate
sense.
what snow is. I'm okay leaving as is, I just wanna make sure.
No, and upper reasonable, but there are situations where, you know, our snowcat drivers wake up at 7:30 at night and they're plowing their driveway to get out at 9 o'clock to get to work, or it just
I think we
happens.
have to understand, we are a snowy mountain community. It doesn't have a whole lot of lawns anyway.
And if we do have someone who's out mowing their yard every Friday night at 3 in the morning, we'll figure out a way to
We'll encourage them to go native.
deal with him. Okay.
All right. It's now 6:10. We have 3 more items to go. I would recommend, the food is out there waiting for us. I would recommend that we, with your concurrence, that we take a 20-minute break, get food, and we reconvene at 6:30. And when we reconvene, we first do the discussion of the refuse container grant program, then we do the discussion of the sidewalk, and then we discuss animal control if we have time. Acceptable to council? Acceptable into order. And the next item on the agenda is the discussion of the refuse container grant program. The refuge container grant program. Mr. Town Manager?
Okay, the town has passed an ordinance requiring that all refuse containers or their enclosures be wildlife proof. For individual residential containers, it goes into effect August of this year. For dumpster enclosures, August of next year. There are, as you all know, the manager has discretion. If your business or HOA cannot public dumpster enclosure built in, but you're working on it, I'll certainly waive enforcement if you have a bear-proof dumpster. Residential cans are typically Council has asked me to come up with an idea for a grant program to help people afford this. So generally, bear-proof individual refuse containers run from about $300 to $500 a can, depending on the can. You can get wildlife-proof ones significantly cheaper. They're not bear-proof. They might keep out crows and chipmunks, but that's it. Some dumpster enclosures, a whole different thing. New enclosure could cost up to $60,000 for design and construction if it's built very well. I know HOA has paid that here recently. Summit County recently ran a grant program. It ran last year with money they got from the state. Gave up to $400 to residents for individual cans and up to $3,000 for commercial dumpster enclosures. That program ended in 2024. That program was funded through a grant program that Colorado Parks and Wildlife runs. I've had good discussions with Parks and Wildlife. They do still have $1 million in grant money this year for this program that they will be awarding in July. The applications are due May 30th. CPW staff, the person in charge of the grant program, really liked what we did here in Keystone. And they've never funded a program where there's a mandatory aspect to it. They've always just funded voluntary programs. They love the fact that it's mandatory. They believe Keystone will likely be given an award of up to $50,000. I want to be very clear whenever I talk about possible grants. Until the check is actually deposited in the bank, you can't necessarily count on grant money is I'll explain to us all in our next time, right? Despite the fact they say they have $50,000 that is sure we'll get, it's not a done thing. So any moving forward we do has to be done carefully in a program that we could afford if the grant falls. So now we'll talk about kind of estimated cost of the program and see how the council wants to do it. There are, I just had this number, there are somewhere around 700 individual residences, duplexes, and small townhome complexes in Keystone. Over 600, I was shocked by that number. The vast majority of those residences have HOAs that have central collection dumpster enclosures. They don't have individual garbage service. I couldn't get a firm number, but I would estimate that our individual garbage service is somewhere between closer to 100 than 200 individual garbage customers in Keystone. You know, all of Loveland Pass Village and the occasional warehouse here and there. Even 100 times $300 is a pretty significant amount of money. That's $30,000 right there. If we give a $300 rebate for every new can purchase. My recommendation, if we do go ahead, my recommendation is we do go ahead with this program. This council passed the mandate. We want to make it as not unfunded as possible. The trash collectors will rent bear-proof trash containers. I don't think this council, I think it would become an administrative nightmare if we were trying to provide grant funds for monthly rentals. Processing this constantly, I think it should be generally done and over with as soon as possible. My recommendation is that the town commit up to $50,000. We start as a two-part program where we subsidize the individual trash cans at a level you guys can talk about right now, and up through August. And then in August we can readdress it and possibly at that point open up the remainder of the funds, maybe for like $1,000 design grants for the HOAs and businesses that are going to do dumpster enclosures. We'll see what sort of money we have. I'm going to send out a survey this coming week to our email list, try to get what sort of interest there is from our businesses, HOAs, and residents on using the grant program. I don't know what the response will be like, but we should have a better idea when I come with a resolution to approve the grant program, or not, depending on the results. So I guess thoughts.
Councilmember Kerr.
Quick question, is the CPW grant a matching funds grant?
No, it is not. No, it's not. They would prefer it. It certainly would score us significantly better if we have money to get.
Councilmember Sullivan.
And just a comment I'll make. I did call one of the companies that does independent trash pickup for individual homes, waste management. And they do in fact charge extra for a bear-proof can if one of their clients has bear-proof can versus a regular, to the tune of over a couple $100 a year. So just a comment, one of those things I hadn't really thought about when we earlier, but I can confirm that. I don't know about others. I don't know how many people use waste management here, but I know they're a big supplier, so just want to make that comment.
Clarifying, that's the rental to upgrade from their provided can to providing a bear can?
No, they said if it's a bear can, whether it's but it's per year service fee, it's per month. So if you have your own cans, what they were saying, I spoke with the engineer, he said, well, it's kind of an insurance policy for us in case the lock breaks and we have to replace it, and, you know, even though it's owned by the individual.
They're charging hundreds of dollars to, just in case they break a can that only costs a few $100s.
It's $200 a year.
But that's just for the service. I have to get out and unlock it and hook the lock. It has nothing to do with whether you change from a regular can.
Yeah, I asked that question, is it because your guy has to get out of the truck and all that kind of thing? He said, well, it's really kind of an insurance policy. I was kind of surprised by that, but I think it's both labor and the potential for lock. Anyway, I just wanted to make that comment because it is something that we need to be conscientious about when we talk about this.
That's really shocking to me because I distinctively remember asking during the initial conversations about this ordinance if there was an increase in cost.
Yeah.
And I think the resounding understanding from a resident bear expert was that there wasn't. So I guess needless to say, I do really appreciate this, this ordinance as a starting ground. I think that we have to be careful because we could easily start dipping into offering grants for the larger organizations, and we could easily drain our entire coffers just with redesigning dumpster enclosures. I really think that the way we're going to get the most impact for our citizens, and especially the vulnerable citizens that are going to be most impacted by an increased cost, would be with a direct program for the single households. And I personally would be in support of matching any CPW grant we had to show some skin in the game, but then also just put a little bit of money where our mouth is. And then lastly, one thing that stuck with me with the presentation we saw from Excel was that unless you fund a program like this at 100% or near 100%, the effectiveness will be drastically different. And I think with that being said, we should definitely look at significant percentage, if not 100% funding for this, as long as it's within reason, right? Like, we're not going to get the Cadillac of bear-proof containers and cover that, but if we have these 3 bear-proof containers are approved under our program at X cost, I would be fully in support of that.
Let me ask Councilmember Permetta a question. Since you have a bear-proof trash container, does your trash provider charge you extra to pick up that trash from that container?
They do not.
So what it sounds like, it's the choice of provider that the individual's made.
Yeah, I think that my provider is already cheaper than Waste Management. I haven't checked in a while, but yeah, Timberline does not charge me extra. It would be, I'd love to get more clarity because it would just be an absolutely astounding thing if you had a provider in community that's operating under the auspices of municipalities and counties with paying access to dump, actively, financially disincentivizing customers from doing the right thing. I'm sure that's something that could be cleared up with a conversation. Otherwise, you could have discussions about incentivizing them to stop disincentivizing people to do the right thing.
Yeah, the other incentive would be the individual who just changed providers.
Right. True.
That's the market working. So we know at least one provider who does not charge. I guess I would not be in favor of a long-term, multi-year commitment to support rentals or to support additional fees for the providers, since there is at least one option available. The question, I guess the question for the town manager, how confident are you if we don't require, in other words, make it a match, that we'll get the grant? How optimistic were they? I will not.
They were quite optimistic, but I will tell you a little bit about grants that have been awarded contracts, signed them, that disappeared.
Until you actually get it. What I'm thinking of, on a grant, on these grants, can the town pay out the funds for a resident for a bear-proof trash container now? And if we get the grant in July, then we could be reimbursed for that, or is it only going forward?
I do not know the details of the grant, but we could certainly.
Funds for a resident for a bear-proof trash container now, and if we get the grant in July, then we could be reimbursed for that, or is it only going forward?
I do not know the details of the grant, but we could certainly stretch out the payment.
All right.
Until July.
Yeah.
For people. We can make that work.
Councilmember Kerr.
John, what fund would this come out of?
This would be general fund.
Under committee?
I don't know. We have to figure it out. We might have to create a new line there.
So
it might come out of our our surplus at the end of the year if we just create a new line.
So I'm going to propose that we do it on a rebate basis and a cost sharing. And the reason for that is there's no equity across the town with respect to this mandate. Some people will say, oh, I'm already good to go. And some people will be in a real hurt. It will hit individuals and HOAs differently across the town. So a cost sharing with the individuals makes sense in this first full year.
And this would be the only year that we would be offering the grant program.
Yeah, well, depending, we could stretch it. It should be a one-year program at the most. And like I said, my thought is we started as a program just with the residential cans, and then in the future expanded if there's funding to help with dumpster closures.
Councilmember Sullivan.
I'm just trying to think about the pragmatic way to do this. Is it a first come, first serve, or are we obligated to, if we fund, say, $20,000 for this project, and we don't get grant money or something, can we say, oh, well, we're going to spend $20,000 on this project, but all that money is taken the first 6 months? If somebody else wants to, what happens to the next person who wants to do it?
It should be.
What are the terms?
It should be first come, first serve.
It should be?
It should be. Any other ways. And it should be a set amount for everyone.
But we wouldn't want to go into this saying, okay, there's only a little bit of money, hurry, come to us. I think maybe you're proposing 50,000. Did I hear that right?
Yeah.
Then we divide this by the number of homes that are potentially going to request, and that brings us down to 250 per.
Where'd you get that math? I'm sorry.
With our estimate of somewhere between 1 and 200.
Okay, on the higher side, the 200.
And 200.
On the higher side, the 200 would be that.
Yeah, I was using the 200 figure.
Yeah.
200 homes and 50,000.
And I don't think they'll all use it to tell.
But
But we need to plan for
we don't want to have a plan that hoping that people won't ask.
Councilmember Permit.
Well, the idea is going to make 200, but considering some matching funds to the grant, if the grant comes to fruition,
Right.
what about 80% of the maximum match of 400.
Wow, that's a lot now.
Well, they buy a large bin for 500, then it would be 400. They bought a $300 bin, then
I hope we have a significant number of people that participate in this, but I mean, I'm just thinking about in like my neighborhood, right? My next door neighbor has a garage and we could have the trash cans in. And when we looked at Welcome Pass Village previously with the zoning issue we had, a lot of those houses have garage doors. And I had some other folks that are in single family neighborhoods that have collection or also garages. And so I think we're gonna have a lot less participation than 200. I mean,
I would get, and I agree with you, I think a lot of the individual residences at this point keep their cans in garages or are like Councilmember Parment already have a bear-proof can. I would be surprised if we got 100 applicants.
so instead of, like, I hate to make a decision in a silo, right? I almost wonder, do we put a feeler out there? Because for me, if we have grant funds available, if we've committed to X number of funds to support our residents, we should use those, right? And I'd really hate for us to put a cap on the numbers that folks can get to cover this mandate. And then we have $20,000 left over, and we're like, oh, thank you, CPW, here you go back, right? So, like, I'd love to get some more data so we can make an informed decision on this, because I think we should try our hardest to fully cover the cost of these as much as possible.
Yeah, and I guess, and I agree with that, that's why I'm going to do a survey. I don't know how good the data will be, but I think, as Councilmember Parment put up before, although this is just a work session, I think it's important to send a message. If we plan on doing this grant program regardless of CPW, it's important to send that message sooner rather than later. We might not have the grant program up and running, but we can have the understanding with the community that there will be help with this project of a fairly significant amount for the individual cans.
Somebody asked the question, is there going to be a rebate afterwards, or is that a rebate program?
Yes, you purchase the can.
So they can purchase it now and then expect a rebate later.
As long as there's clear commitment that regardless of whether CPW funds come through, this council will fund a grant program.
Well, so you're asking for a number of questions there. The first one is, are we willing to do it even if we don't get the grant? My view is, yes, we would, but I'd like to get the rest of the council.
I think we've already did that, yeah.
Okay, so,
Yeah, the question is, what would the amount that would be paid may be different if we're standalone versus that grant? In other words, would we want to pick 400 or, because I think you want to make it simple, as a maximum, or 300 or 500, whatever the max is, and say that's the max you will pay, or if we're going to do a matching, would you want to say, we'll guarantee that we'll pay 200 or 150 or 200, subject to, and you can get up to, if we get the grant, you're going to get more.
well, we can't really talk about the grant though at this point.
No, but if we get the grant, you could get more. If the grant is approved, we get
But
more.
we propose, do you say that? Do you
There's nothing that would prevent us from saying there, is there?
Other than simplicity.
Yeah. Because if you get a grant, then you're going to be, the town obligation is going to be significantly less than if you don't get the grant. The amount we would spend would be significantly less than if you don't get the grant. And so from an obligation to fund standpoint, And I don't know what the answer is, I'm just, Councilmember Kerr.
So I think that's a good possibility to assess, but another one could be that we commit to pay, to do cost sharing or up to a certain amount of money, up to the 50,000 for individuals. And then should we get the grant, then that money can be available for the ones that are required by next August. The rationale being, as a minimum, should we not get the grant, that they will be able to cost share among all the members of their HOA or businesses. We'll send most money to the individuals who feel this will be a bigger shock.
I guess to wrap things up, since we're getting awfully close. CPW recommended that there be a certain level of buy-in from everyone else. I very much like Councilmember Parmet's idea of an 80% rebate with a max of $300 to $400 would be. And I think if the council could decide 80% and decide on what that max is, and I think that just has to be it for the program and not have a second go for if we get more money, just use the additional grant money to fund design and dumpster enclosures for the most part.
It's 80% up to 400, first come, first served.
If we work out the numbers and know what we're getting into here, the range is anywhere from probably 100 to 200 foot homes. Well, like you said, that was the house size, so.
It's 80% up to 400, first come, first served.
If we work out the numbers and know what we're getting into here, the range is anywhere from probably 100 to 200 foot homes. Well, like you said, that was the house size, so.
Let's set a max for this program, and when it's done, especially if we don't get more grant funds.
So I think it'd be really helpful if we could get official quotes from 3 big players in town. Just because I've been looking online, if we were to get the Toger one, which is one of the more popular ones, $510 from Uline, comes out to $408 if you do 80%. So I'd like to get some official quotes from the actual vendors that most people would probably be buying.
They're most likely
I agree.
from your computer.
Well, I can't get a quote from Timberline.
Okay.
Like I could call them, right, but I think we should have like an official quote from Timberline Waste Management, and I think there's like Garbage Gurus or something. So
When you buy a bear-proof trash container on your own for pickup, do you have to buy one from the trash company, or can you go out in the commercial market and buy it?
You can go out and buy one. I bought mine through my trash company back then, but I've had it 10 years now. If we wanted to, at the next work session, Keystone from Timberline would love to come and talk trash with us. And I do think it would be, he's offered to try and get quotes for various vendors.
I would be obliged.
Yeah.
Especially since when we started our real waste management, and we were told you can't have your own can, you have to have our can. So there's some details we need to get down.
So I'll discuss the Brightwood sidewalk in my manager's report, if that's okay with the council.
Okay. In that case, at this point, I would recommend that we defer the animal control policy to the next meeting, next work session, and we adjourn this session to go into a council meeting. Is there an objection? The work session is adjourned.
We have just a moment to read.